Paul. We're talking about Paul's second missionary journey. And we saw that he was going to go into new ground, actually a new continent. That's where he passed into Europe. And we saw that he left Asia Minor from Troas, and he came to an island, Samothracia, if I'm pronouncing that right. And then from there, they sailed to Neapolis, which is the first point of contact that Paul has with Europe, and or the continent of Europe. And we talked about the first one of the first places that he settled, or he started ministering, was Philippi. And Philippi being one of the chief cities of Macedonia, it seems that Paul always went to these larger cities. I don't know, I got to thinking, a lot of times I'm thinking he went to these small towns. He didn't. They were, I think I haven't found one yet that wasn't the center of something, the capital of something, metropolis, a major port. The Lord sent him to places where the gospel could get out. And I'm not against going to a small town. I don't have a problem with that. What I'm saying is, I mean, Xenia is a small town, but when you need to get the gospel out, you need to go to places where it's a crossroads, and we're going to see when we get down to Corinth, man, that was the place. Everything has its own challenges, and Corinth has its, but man, when it came to foot traffic, when it came to shipping, that was the place to get the gospel out. And we'll see that the Lord wanted him there. At Philippi, his first convert, I believe, is Lydia, a businesswoman from Thyatira, sold purple garments, or things dyed purple. And evidently that was to have that color, which was, purple is the color of royalty. And they put on Jesus Christ a purple and a crimson robe. It was red on one side, purple on the other. And purple was always designated as royalty, so these garments would have been highly prized that she's bringing. I think to get those colors, you had to find certain things, not like now where they can just about produce any kind of color you want. It'll probably give you cancer, but they can produce about any color you want. These had to be natural colors that they could find in nature, that once you boiled them down or stewed them together, whatever, you got the color you wanted. At one time, I think I looked it up. I can't remember, but it's probably some plant that you have to climb some mountain to get, Because if it was easy, everybody would, somebody would get that door for me, please. If it was easy, then everybody would have had that color, and guess what? It wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't have been worth having a business over, because everybody could do it. So, from Lydia gets saved in her household, and then we saw also in Philippi that Paul gets in trouble when he cast out this devil out of this woman. It's following him around, and she's stating the truth. It's funny how devil possession always has a lot of religion connected with it. You'll never find a devil in the New Testament that's an atheist. And they usually say the truth. He said, these men are the servants of the Most High God who came to bring unto us the way of salvation. Well, it was true, but she just kept saying it. And the problem is that it's not that she's not stating the truth. Paul gets upset with her because she's demon possessed. And it's like it's like having your worst enemy standing there, singing your praises. It's like, yeah, he's saying the right thing, but that guy's my enemy. Huh? Yeah. You just don't need that. And eventually Paul got tired of it, because everybody knew what kind of woman this was. She has a spirit of divination. It's like that's like a crook putting their stamp of approval on you. You can do without that. Politicians, man, when somebody gets accused of something, you notice politicians, they flee away from them because they're afraid something's going to stick. They'll be associated with it, Anyway, so he gets thrown in the slammer over this, because when he cast out this devil, she had a spirit of divination to where she could divine. How much she could divine, I don't know, but the devil can probably guess a good portion of your future. He's that smart. Spirit of divination, I don't know what all they could do, but they could do enough to where, and sometimes they're just telling you generalities, like a card reader, somebody reading the palm of your hand, they're going to give you such generalities. They know human nature. That's what they're good at. And they'll say certain things that'd be true just about anybody. But anyway, she probably had something like the real deal, and he cast her out, and all of a sudden now they're not making any money. And nothing like persecuting the preacher when he gets into your pocketbook. So they come after Paul and Silas, throw them in the slammer, and they find themselves at the bottom of the jail. Of course, you know the story that the Lord gets them out of that cell. The jailer gets saved, the Philippian jailer, plus his family. And there's two nucleuses of a church. You can have two different churches there. It's a possibility. They stay a little longer with Lydia, then they pack up their bags. And we left off last week where they were passing through Amphipolis and Apollonia, and just cities that it mentions along the way. I want to say something about Greece, because the further we go, we find differences in Greece is 80% mountainous, and it juts out into the Mediterranean, and it's kind of surrounded by three bodies of water, three different seas. Because of that, and there's one part of Greece is where they call it the Peloponnese, and that's where there is an isthmus, which is a land bridge, and that is where Corinth is. But there are such barriers in this country that, Sparta is different than Athens, and Athens is different than Thessalonica. Now they're all, you got to remember they're all under Rome at this point, but they're Greek, okay? They've been settled by Greeks and everything. At least the Greeks took them over, and they're so segregated that you never find a centralized power in Greece. They didn't centralize their power. They were kind of, they had their own city-states, and they could even have their own constitution. So you might go to one city and find it one way, and go to another city and find it another way. So I just be aware of that. And I said before, when we looked at Greece as an empire, they didn't have any centralized power, because that didn't appeal to Alexander the Great. It didn't appeal to him to have centralized power. He just wanted to conquer. As long as he had some place to conquer, he would just designate out, and they became like dynasties, where this family ran this portion of this, and this family ran this portion of this, and that's really what you see. And even Greece itself is divided up like that. But they had a strong democratic way about them, and we're going to see some things here that I hadn't seen before, kind of interesting. But we're now come to Thessalonica. He leaves Philippi and comes to Thessalonica, and it's another chief city of Macedonia. It's a commercial city and a seaport. They were considered, even though the Rome has them, there's still some things that they were considered free. And they had their own constitution in Thessalonica. We find that there's a synagogue there. Look in Acts 17. And like I said, this is consistent. If there is a synagogue in any of these cities, it's where Paul goes first. Why would Paul go to the synagogue first? Right. Romans 1:16, to the Jew first, then to the Greek. That's what it says. And that's exactly how Paul did it. If there was a synagogue there, but we're going to find out that he's going to come across, by the time he gets done with Thessalonica, maybe it's Berea, I can't remember, one of these others, that he's told that Jew that henceforth we go to the Gentiles. And we'll see that here. Acts 17, 1-4. Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where was a synagogue of the Jews, and Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures. So if he started on the Sabbath, it'd be 15 days. I mean, he was there 3 Sabbaths. Could have been 3 weeks, I don't know. But opening and alleging that Christ must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Jesus whom I preach unto you is Christ. And some of them believed and consorted with Paul and Silas, and of the devout Greeks a great multitude, and of chief women not a few. So he gets the attention of some of these Jews, but what's more importantly is he's got a multitude of these Gentiles that are like these Greeks. They're listening. When he talks about these devout women, I mean, like I said, if you want a civilized place in the world, Greece is it. Rome is it, as far as being civilized. I didn't say right, or even right with God, but we're going to see that they were civilized. And these women had either, maybe they had places of authority or businesses or something like that, but they were, he says they're, I think in one place it talks about them, chief women, it says, and devout Greeks. He says a great multitude. Paul writes, what's interesting here is Paul writes both of his epistles to the Thessalonians before he's done with this journey. I didn't realize that. When he gets, because if you look at the back, look at the end of 1 Thessalonians, and you should probably have this at the very bottom. The first epistle unto the Thessalonians was written from Athens. Okay, he gets down there in Athens, and before he even leaves the continent, he has written them twice. What's interesting is he doesn't write Philippi until he's in prison at Rome. Yeah. You say, what are you reading in that? I don't know. I just know that those first two epistles. Now, could Paul have been writing to other places? He could have been. We don't know. I imagine he probably, he may have been sending them, outlines. Who knows what he was doing? But when it comes to God gathering together canon, in other words, the scriptures, we have what God, whatever we have in this book is what God has for us, and it is the compilation of everything. We know that Laodicea got an epistle because he told the Colossians to read it, and he told the Laodiceans to read the one from Colossae. We don't have a book of Laodicea in here. Okay, we got it mentioned, but we don't have it. Why? Well, we evidently don't need it. Probably some of the material that's covered in the epistle to Laodicea is covered in these other epistles. It'd be like teaching in 3 different places, and you're teaching the same subject. You're going to cover the same ground. He's going to teach the same thing about his revelation. So God gave us what we needed, but it's just interesting that before Paul is done with this journey, he's already written to the Thessalonians twice. I have no idea how far apart they were, and I want to mention something else here. In Dr. Ruckman's study Bible, I've got the picture here of their missionary journey, and it says AD 47, 48, and I told you that originally. I don't think that date's correct. And the reason I say that is it doesn't agree with Ushers, and man, it really does cause some problems being that early. It doesn't line up with Ushers in Acts, and then when you're reading through the Pauline epistles, there's a 6-year discrepancy there. This may be a little too early. This may be just a little bit too early. If it was AD 53 or 54, it'd kind of line up perfectly, because then it puts a gap between the first one and the second, and the second and third look like they're almost immediately, that he starts his third journey almost immediately after the second. So we'll get into that, but there has to be a little bit of a gap there. Plus, Paul had to, going on a trip like this, Paul had to have support. Churches had to help him take these journeys. He had to have supplies. He had to have the men. Arrangements had to be made, I'm sure, for people's families that were going with him. Now, he didn't have one, but who's to say the rest of them didn't? And so a lot of things would go into it, just as we find today. You say, yeah, I'm going to the mission field. Well, unless you're going one state over, you got a lot of preparation to do. It'll blow your mind what you have to prepare to make that kind of move. Okay. So Paul has a number of converts here in Thessalonica. And look at verse 5 and 6, and I'm going to get back over there. Acts 17, verse 5 and 6. And the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took of them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, and that is useful idiots. Our country's full of them, and politicians know how to harness them and use them for whatever purpose they want. I've never seen the like. You know, first thing, if a politician's talking, you ought to suspect them of lying. And secondly, you ought to check everything they tell you. I mean, you ought to fact check everything. But notice they chose lewd fellows of the baser sort and gathered a company, settled the city on an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason and sought to bring them out to the people. I think this Jason's one of the rulers of the synagogues, or he's a ruler of the city too. They drew Jason. No, I think he's connected. I think Corinthians connects Jason with the synagogue, or he's got a house that's right next to the synagogue or something like that. But they're just, you know, a lot of times when your Gentiles are, they couldn't really, they just knew that these were Jews. They knew that Paul's a Jew. Silas was a Jew, I guess, and they just figured, well, we're going to go after these Jews. It's these Jews causing the problem, you know. It wasn't, the persecution wasn't as defined as it should be. In fact, we're going to see something here toward the end of this lesson today that was kind of strange to me that it fell out the way it did. But you'll find out that anytime there's a ruckus going on or a riot or whatever, there is confusion. And it's happened to many people, you know, where I mean, it's like going to a place where you're protesting and you not be a part of it, but then all of a sudden you find yourself right in the middle of it. Philippians 3:2, and remember, he just got done at Philippi. He wrote this to them. He said, beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of a concision. He's talking about the circumcision there. He's talking about the Jews. And what Paul realizes is just about every place he goes, when God starts to work and they start to see people getting saved, especially by a multitude, that those Jews rise up and try to stop the work, try to throw a monkey wrench in the work. You'll find this is true whenever things are going well in the local church. Look out. People getting saved, you know, people getting right with God, people walking right, doing right, and just, you know, man, look out. That's when the devil will come in here and throw a monkey wrench in things. I've been pastoring long enough that I've seen it enough that it doesn't surprise me when it happens. It's just like, oh, here we go, you know. Every preacher knows this. Any preacher hasn't been reading his Bible. That you'll think everything's going, I mean, things are going wonderful. That's when I'm like, oh no. Things are going too well in the church. And how you notice, well, Acts 13:45, this is the last missionary journey. And when the Jews saw the multitudes, they were filled with envy and spake against those things which were spoken by Paul, contradicting and blaspheming. That was the first missionary journey. So, you know, he can't get out of Asia Minor without problems. And now he's in Europe, and guess what? They're causing problems there. Look at Romans 11:28. Romans 11:28 says, as concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes, but as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sake. So they're going to be contrary, the Jews, wherever they're at. And, you know, the fact that there's a metropolis or a trading area there of trade or whatever, that Jew's going to be there. That Jew's going to be there. He's going to be there making money, but he's also going to be there. And it's funny that they didn't make the proselytes they should have made. Paul comes in and he's preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, the death, burial, and resurrection, and he's winning some folks. So, kind of interesting. I'll give you an example of this in the modern day. And when I understood this, it just blew my mind. Jews will vote for the absolute worst president that you've ever seen. They'll vote someone that supports sodomites. They'll vote for someone that supports the Palestinian movement and Hamas and everything else. They do, and they know it too. Rather than vote for someone that might claim to be a Christian or is sympathetic toward Christians. They're jealous and they're envious. And even though they're right now they're patting you on the head and saying, "Thank you, Christian brothers, for standing with us," blah, blah, blah. They hate you. They hate you the fact that God is blessing you and God is giving you what they deserve or what they think they deserve. That is their mentality. And anytime Paul comes in there, man, he's preaching the gospel, and all of a sudden a multitude of people are listening to him, and they just envy. They move with envy. And the same is true today. I've never understood that. I've never understood why you would vote for someone that doesn't care whether you live or die. In fact, does things that are exactly the opposite of what you want them to do for your nation. And then the other guy openly support you. I mean, or vote for people that are just void of any type of morality. I realize morality is at a low ebb on both sides of the aisle. But, I mean, the one side is just in the gutter. They'll vote for them. I've never understood it to this day. You wait and see who they vote for. All right. Something that I learned here was when it came to these ruins right here in this area, in Thessalonica, in that area, they found an ark. Okay, just like an arch. I'm sorry, not an ark, but an arch. And on this arch was the name of 6 politarchs. That's a name that the Romans gave it's a Macedonian title, but it was given by the Romans for elected governors. And remember I told you these are like city-states? It would be the governors that kind of ruled that entire area there. And there were 6 names on this arch. And 3 of those names show up in the Bible. They show up in one verse. And that's Sosipater, Gaius, and Secunda. And they're all in Acts 20, verse 4. That's amazing. That arch is in the British Museum, as far as what I understand, if it's still intact, but they have photographs too of it. And it's got those 3 names on there. I mean exactly those 3 names. 3 of the 6. When Paul's done with Thessalonica, he goes down to Berea. And of course, he's kind of forced to kind of move on because of the problems that the Jews are causing. And where does he go? Look at verse 10 to 12. And I'm in the wrong place again. Verse 10 to 12, and the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night into Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. Now, I don't think Paul is so much worried about getting killed. He's already been killed once, right? He's not so much worried about it, but everybody else is. And you'll see it's always the brethren ushering him off somewhere, It says the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas. It's too hot here, Paul. We got to get you out of here, It says in verse 11, these were more noble than those in Thessalonica in that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so. Therefore, many of them believed also of honorable women, which were Greeks, and of men not a few. So he actually is doing better here in Berea than he was in Thessalonica, and he did well in Thessalonica. But he's got a whole bunch of folks that want to get saved. Berea is, I don't know, where's my pointer at? We got Berea up here? Right there, okay? Berea is about 45 miles from Thessalonica, west and a little south. That's where it's at, about 45 miles away from them. And Berea was the first city of Macedonia to fall to the Romans. First city of Macedonia to fall to the Romans. The modern day would be a place called Veria, V-E-R-I-A. And of course, Berea is the capital of something. It's the capital of the region of Emathia. Immathia. Now I'll tell you what, I'm finding districts upon regions upon districts upon, it about makes me crazy. But we have the same thing here. We are in Spring Valley. And Spring Valley is a suburb of Dayton. Dayton is in Montgomery County. Montgomery County is in the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio is in the United States of America on the continent of North America, right? Okay, well, they got the same thing. Yeah, and the Western Hemisphere, thank you. On planet Earth. Okay. I know somebody will say, in the Milky Way? Yeah, the first heaven. We keep going. Now, tradition says, and anytime we come to tradition, it's like, yeah. But tradition says that Onesimus, who was Onesimus? Yep, Philemon's slave that Paul leads to the Lord. Tradition says Onesimus was a bishop here in Berea. Now, that's tradition. I don't know, you can't. And the reason you have to worry about that is when you start seeing Constantine and all that thing start rising up, man, they swear they found Peter's bones in Rome, and they didn't. There's a guy that found with his name on it, Simon Bar-Jonah, found him right next to the bones of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And they were found there in Israel. They weren't found in Rome. They'll absolutely fabricate whatever they need to fabricate to propagate their religion. So you got to take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to what tradition tells you. Okay, if it kind of goes along with the scriptures, which it might, it's kind of a nice, but I wouldn't I wouldn't bank on it if I was you. You don't know if it's true or not. Acts 17, verse 13 to 15. So while he's in Berea, trouble finds him again. And look what happens. But when the Jews of Thessalonica had knowledge that the word of God was preached of Paul at Berea, they came thither also and stirred up the people. I mean, it's not like, they didn't cause enough trouble there in Thessalonica. They followed him to Berea. This happens a lot. I mean, it's almost like the devil gets in these people and they just, like a dog with a bone, they try to track you down and cause you more trouble. And it says, and then immediately the brethren sent away Paul to go, as it were, to the sea. I mean, they're sending him all the way down to the coastline. I think it's something like 300 miles, man. So he ends up having to leave again and to leave what's happening in Berea. Now, he's got a good thing going in Berea. So where do they send Paul? They send him from Berea all the way to the sea. Well, that's Athens. They're sending him all the way to the coast. And Silas and Timothy remain in Berea. Probably there's not a lot of heat on them. If Paul's the one doing the main speaking, they've got their eyes on him, and Silas and Timothy, maybe they don't have as much heat on them, so they're kind of staying behind. We find out that Paul doesn't like that. He sends for them to come immediately. Something about, staying together, not breaking up the team, not getting separated. And again, they kind of usher Paul away, They realize just how important he is. I'm sorry? Yeah, there's always strength in numbers. And of course, Paul's down there by himself. He's like, hey, okay, now I'm in the middle of Athens, which is a city wholly given to idolatry. And where's my backup team? Where's my wingmen? They're not here. So it kind of works both ways. So he winds up in Athens, capital city of Greece, and of course the largest city, of course. And it's named after the Greek goddess Athena, which is supposed to be the goddess of wisdom. And it says there in Acts 17:16, now while Paul waited for them at Athens, I mean, he's waiting on them, his spirit was stirred in him when he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. I think he was almost, he was just going to keep stay down and stay low until his team shows up. But he starts looking around, man, and this whole city's, they're nothing but idolaters. I'll just give you a few of the Athenian gods and see how many of them you recognize that you've been, I don't know, maybe been a part of. Zeus, I mean, that's one, of course. Poseidon. Remember the Poseidon adventure? It's a goddess of the sea, or a god of the sea. Apollo. Apollo, in the Bible, means the destroyer. It has to do with the Apollyon, or the son of perdition. A direct connection. Yet we had this Apollo missions. Okay, you said, well, that was probably just, they just had to come up with a word, and they came up with the Apollo missions. Well, then why did they name their sister project Artemis, which is the twin sister of Apollo? You know what Artemis means. She's the hunter, the goddess of hunting. You see, they're not up there to explore anything. They're up there to hunt and find somebody. Talks about ascending. Wilt thou ascend and bring down Christ from above? They're wanting to bring somebody down. But why would you, I mean, I'm just asking you, why would you name these things after false gods, Greek gods? How about Olympias? Don't we have the Olympic Games? What do you think that's about? There's a lot of pagan. This Dionysus, it's interesting, there's a fellow that Paul wins, Dionysius is his name, and he's named it. If you go to Romans 16, you'll see something there that will, almost make you laugh. Paul's winning all these people to the Lord, Junia. They're all named after some false Greek god. You can't really change your name. You're kind of stuck with it. Thank God there's a new name written down in glory. Now, we were Mike and Bob and John. I understand that now, but if you were named Olympus or you were named Dionysius, that's your name. Dionysius was the god of wine and debauchery, yeah. Then there was Athena, then there's Nike. Oh yeah, Nike's the god of victory. So now you got to put the shoes on. They name it after that stuff. So you saying I shouldn't buy Nike? I'm not telling you anything like that. I'm just telling you, be aware. You've got Gaia. Yeah, she was the goddess of the earth. You hear that name constantly. These liberals and these do-gooders, I talk about Gaia. It's a false goddess. You have Helios, there's the god of the sun. Hermes, the god of travel. I was trying to think if there's anything connected. My mind can't think of anything. But Hermes is also represented by Mercury. Then you have Ares, which is going to pop up here, which is the god of war. And that's just a few. There are hundreds more. That's just the ones that kind of stuck out to me. When you get to Athens is often regarded as the cradle of Western civilization and is the birthplace of democracy. Now remember, we're supposed to have a republic, not a democracy as far as our federal government. You say, why? Because if you have a democracy, you have mob rule. The reason we have a republic is rule of law, and that's important. Now, look in Acts 17, look at verse 17 to 21. It says, therefore disputed he in the synagogue with the Jews and with the devout persons and in the market daily with them that met with him. Then certain philosophers, we got something new, of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him. And some said, what will this babbler say? Some, he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. Is he preaching the gospel? Yeah. And they took him and brought him unto Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is. For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears, and we would know therefore what these things mean. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but to either tell or to hear some new thing. Okay? They're busybodies. But I want you to go back up there and look that there's two philosophies that show up there, Epicureans and Stoics. See, what are those? Democrat and Republicans. Liberals and conservatives. That's what they are. You can be either one of those and not be saved. You can be either one of those and not be right with God. I think one is better than the other. The Epicurean is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. He doesn't care about nothing. Everything goes, has no morality. You know, he's got the morals of a dog. That's your Epicurean. Your Stoic, he's more of a stiff upper lip, got a code of conduct, and, going to live by some values. You got Republicans and Democrats. Now, both of them are idolaters. That's what you need to draw from that. And when it says, and look, notice here that when he's preaching to them, it says in verse 19, and they took him again. And now it's not the brethren, it's the Greeks. And they took him and brought him unto Areopagus. They have taken him to a place. Okay? It's called the Hill of Ares. Remember that god of war? They've taken him to the Hill of Ares, also called Mars Hill. And I didn't realize what this was. I thought, they took him to some little hill. They did take him to a real hill. But it's called Mars Hill. But what this place actually was kind of blew me away. Let me read it to you. Mars Hill is the Roman name for a hill in Athens, Greece, called the Hill of Ares, or the Areopagus. That's what Areopagus means, Hill of Ares. Ares was the Greek god of war, and according to Greek mythology, this hill was a place where Ares stood trial before the other gods for the murder of Poseidon's son, blah, blah, blah. Rising some 377 feet above the land below, and not far from the Acropolis and Agora, which was the marketplace, Mars Hill served as a meeting place for the Areopagus court, the highest court in Greece for civil, criminal, and religious matters. Even under Roman rule in the time of the New Testament, Mars Hill remained an important meeting place where philosophy, religion, and law were discussed. These Greeks grab him, and they put him before all of Athens. Say, now tell them what you said. And Paul's up there, man, and I bet there was thousands and thousands of people. And Paul had his soapbox. Where's his wingmen? They haven't arrived yet. I mean, you need somebody to bury your dead body, But that's what Mars Hill was. And that's kind of a. I mean, when I think of the guts that Paul had, I'm amazed. I mean, that man. Now I think he had good reason to have that kind of courage. He saw glory. He saw Jesus. But still, it would take all. I mean, he probably didn't know where they were taking him. And when they put him up there, man, they put him. I mean, you might as well put him in the Capitol building addressing the nation. Can you imagine that opportunity? Some men have had it and never took the opportunity to tell people the gospel. You can never count on the Pope to ever tell you the gospel. Probably doesn't know it himself. But it's amazing how he gets the microphone of all these nations and worldwide coverage and never tells anybody how to be saved. Paul got that opportunity and preached. Here's the result of it. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. That's typical. Others said, we will hear thee again of this matter. This is a new thing. We want to hear you again. So Paul departed from among them, howbeit certain men clave unto him and believed, among the which was Dionysius, the Areopagite. So now he's got, it's like having a convert named Jack Daniels or Jim Beam. Dionysius, the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris and others with them. So he gets some results there. Now, I don't know if he's established a church there in Athens. We never hear anything else about that. Remember, it is wholly given to idolatry. Berea, Thessalonica, Philippi, and now he's going to come down to Corinth. He's actually leaving the mainland. He's coming down to this, what they call isthmus, this land bridge, and this is where Corinth is. It is the land bridge. And the Peloponnesia, if I'm pronouncing that thing right. Okay, here's Corinth. Here's the way through there, the land bridge. And then you got all this huge area that it leads to. That's where they were. And a major place of commerce. And in 18:1, he says, and after these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth. Let's see. You've got Romans, Greeks, Jews, and strangers from everywhere, which kind of explains some things of why Paul had to address some issues like tongues. You know, tongues in the Bible are languages, not babbling. And he had to address that. Why? Because, I mean, you might, at Corinth, it was a major shipping hub. So you might have some folks show up from 15 different nations. And they might know a trade language, which most folks do, don't they? They know just enough of a trade language, but they might be in there, and maybe some of them have already heard. Maybe some of them have already know the scriptures, and they want to say something. Paul said, look, we got to have some rules about this. Speaking in an unknown tongue. Why? It's unknown to the congregation. If I get up here and start saying something you don't recognize, how is that edifying you? I mean, I even say what edifies you and you fall asleep on me. Can you imagine if I just start babbling? You'll all be asleep in 5 minutes. But it was a great place for distributing the gospel, but it has its challenges. Why? You got everybody's brother, and you have all this idolatry going on. But look what the Lord tells Paul in Acts 18, verse 7 to 11. It says, and he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshiped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. I thought that was Jason. That's Justus. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in a night by a vision, says, be not afraid, but speak and hold not thy peace, for I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. For I have much people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. So Paul ends up staying. Lord says, I want you to stay here, and I want you to establish something. And he's there 18 months. So this journey may have been longer than 2 years, because he spends 18 months here. It is a great place. Why? The Lord chooses places that get a lot of foot traffic, shipping, and trade. Do you know what God chose to get the word of God out to the entire world? He chose an island nation. He chose England to produce a purified, perfect Bible in the universal language of the last days. England brought the King James Bible to every continent and country on earth. That's how God did it. Chose an island nation. And it's interesting. God's got to choose a place where there's civilization. You're not going to do much with an uncivilized people. I mean, I'm not saying you can't win them. I'm not saying you can't establish churches, but you're not going to distribute the gospel with an uncivilized people. You have to go to where there is civilization. Paul is going to where there is civilization, and there is a lot of it. Why? Because commerce. You know, the love of money is the root of all evil, but, you know, also it's, Bible says that, something about the belly. I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm thinking of another verse where it says, all the labor of man is for his belly. I think it's in Romans. So, look what we have in chapter 18, verse 4 to 6. And it says, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, they finally caught up with Paul. They probably showed they can't imagine what Paul's already done. Paul was pressed in the spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean henceforth, or from henceforth, I will go into the Gentiles. He did that in Asia Minor, and he was done. He has done that in Europe. He said, henceforth we go to the Gentiles. It's not that he's not going to preach to another Jew, because I think we find him showing up in synagogue, but as far as he's concerned, he says, your blood be upon your own hands. I'm free of you if you reject this. Acts 18, verse 12 to 17. Paul gets in trouble here, and by the way, Achaia is just another region that Corinth is in. Like I said, there's region after region after region. I kept finding layers of regions. About made me crazy. Anyway, it says, and when Gallio, verse 12, was the deputy of Achaia, the Jews made insurrection with one accord against Paul. Insurrection. They have caused an uproar in the city. I mean, almost come to arms. And these Jews have some power, man. They're probably like Jews anywhere in the world, man. You know what? God blesses them physically, financially. They're scientists, they're musicians, they're actors, you name it, man. Doctors, best in the world in most cases. Physicists, God has just blessed those people. And because of that, they do well in business. And you do well not to go into business with them. I'm just telling you. The Bible says to separate yourself and not yoke yourself, especially with a Jew. He'll outsmart you 10 ways from Sunday. You'll wind up with some string or you'll wind up with some striped goats or whatever, and you'll have about a handful of them all sick, and he'll be taking your herd and leaving town with it. Y'all know that story, right? Okay. Anyway, it says, when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, the Jews made insurrection, one accord against Paul. Notice they're in one accord. And brought him to the judgment seat, saying, this fellow persuadeth men to worship God contrary to the law. And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said unto the Jews, if it were a matter of wrong or wicked lewdness, O ye Jews, reason would that I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names and of your law, look ye to it, for I will be no judge of such matters. And he drave them from the judgment seat. In other words, these Jews try to stir up something, and you've actually got a judge here that understands the law, unlike the ones today. And so look, it's got nothing to do with our laws. It's got something to do with yours, so you handle it. And he convinces them to get them out of there. Now, here's what I don't understand. It says, then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue. Now, I don't know if he's for Paul or against Paul at this point. But it's almost like if they're all united, and of course, you know, he talks about these Jews, he's winning some of them, this Justus, and these ones up here in verse 7 to 11, Crispus, it mentions him, doesn't mention this Sosthenes. He may have been the one leading the insurrection, and when the judge doesn't go after Paul, they take it out on Sosthenes because he's the one that got everything into an uproar. Now, I'm just speculating this, okay? Because it says, then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the chief ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. And Gallio cared for none of these things. He didn't care if they did that or not. The reason I say that is in 1 Corinthians 1:1, Paul calls Sosthenes a brother. I tell you why I think this might be one of those peculiar things that happened. He told Paul, nobody's going to lay a finger on you, didn't he? Did anybody lay a finger on Paul? Did they lay a finger on Sosthenes? Probably multiple fists they laid on. I think that Sosthenes gets saved as a result of this beating. That's just me. God uses things like that. But it looks like they're going after, I mean, if it would have been Paul's company, it had almost been almost like a breach of what God said. Now, he did say Paul. He said, they won't touch you, Paul. And they didn't. But they did touch this guy. And I'm just thinking maybe Sosthenes was the one that led the insurrection. He gets beat up because he caused the ruckus, and the judge said, you're out of line, get out of my court. And as a result of that beating, I think maybe maybe Paul helped rescue him. I don't know. But he becomes a brother according to 1 Corinthians 1:1. Now, I can't prove that. He could have been on Paul's side. I couldn't tell you, but God uses all kinds of things, man. He'll use a mob. Okay, finally, and we're not going to spend any real time on this because I've already gone well over my time, but after Corinth, Paul goes to this port of Cenchrea, where he sails from Corinth to Ephesus, which is back in Asia Minor. And we're going to deal with Ephesus more next week, because when he takes his third missionary journey, that's one of the first places he talks about him going is Ephesus. I think he makes a beeline for him. But Cenchrea is the port of Corinth from which Paul sailed, and he takes Priscilla and Aquila with him. And we're going to find them in Ephesus. And we're going to, they're, Priscilla and Aquila, they wind up a few different places helping out and ministering. But we're going to see that Paul leads them there. He doesn't tarry too long on this missionary trip in Ephesus. He wants to go to Jerusalem and then back home. And so we'll pick up the third missionary journey next week, and we're probably going to begin at Ephesus. I feel like I left something out. I'm trying to think what it was. Something I wanted to say and I didn't say it. Oh well. Okay, any questions?